Sometimes fatigue does not arrive in the evening, but in the morning. The moment we open our eyes, we already feel it. Life today will be heavy. Not because of the heroic challenges ahead, but because everything is once again the same. The day, like a wrung-out cloth, has not even begun and already feels meaningless. We drink coffee, scroll the news, stare at screens, yet the sense of emptiness lingers. It spreads under the skin. This is not physical exhaustion. This is the exhaustion of living itself. We call it emotional burnout, but at its core lies more than simple tiredness. It is a profound inner conflict, a silent collision between what we do and who we truly are, between our actions and our sense of meaning. And when this conversation is absent for too long, what remains is a silence that does not soothe but oppresses. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts showed that in people suffering from burnout, activity in the prefrontal cortex is disrupted, the very area responsible for motivation, planning, and perceiving the future. This literally makes it impossible to envision tomorrow. It is as if fog has descended upon the horizon of the mind. In this fog, desires vanish, goals dissolve, and the very idea of moving forward evaporates. The Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, survivor of Nazi concentration camps and author of the classic book Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "A man who knows the why for his existence will be able to bear almost any how." For Frankl, meaning could never be imposed from the outside. It could only be discovered within. And often, it was crisis that forced this discovery. Not because pain itself was sacred, but because pain shattered illusions, opening space for truth. But what happens when we lose our why? When each morning greets us with emptiness? When even success no longer brings joy? This is existential fatigue, a weariness deeper than the body, a weariness that seeps into the soul. Consider the story of Lara, a 36-year-old therapist from Vienna. On paper, she had everything: a stable practice, a waiting list of patients, the respect of her colleagues. Yet every morning was a battle against herself. She smiled, listened, and spoke the right words, but at night she collapsed, unable even to meet her loved ones. Everything felt pointless. At the very peak of her career, she felt dead inside. One day, she simply stopped going to work. No call, no message, she just disappeared. Later she confessed, "I realized I never wanted to be a therapist. It was my mother's dream." Years of living someone else's expectations had silenced her own voice. Her brain, unable to resolve the fracture, began to shut her down, first with fatigue, then depression, then indifference. Neuropsychology shows that our brains are wired to avoid pain and seek predictability, even if predictability causes suffering. We remain in toxic jobs, destructive relationships, and harsh self-images because the brain whispers, "Stay here, at least this is familiar." Every step toward change feels like a threat. Neuroscientist Dr. Tara Swart, author of The Source, explains that under chronic stress, the brain switches into survival mode. The cortex, the seat of reflection and creativity, goes quiet, while the amygdala, the fear center, takes over, triggering fight or flight. In this state, we lose access to imagination, flexibility, and the ability to dream. Even rest does not restore us, because the problem is not the tired body, but the brain trapped in its cage. The great philosophers often pointed the way back to ourselves. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But how do we begin that examination if we no longer hear our own voice? One simple exercise is to ask yourself every night before sleep, what gave me joy today? Not achievement, not approval, but genuine joy. This seemingly naive practice slowly tunes our inner antenna. Suddenly we notice that what we thought we needed does not matter at all, while what we overlooked makes us feel alive. Another approach is what Arianna Huffington, founder of the Huffington Post, called micro steps, a method born from her own burnout. You do not need to quit your job, retreat to the mountains, or meditate for hours. Start small. 5 minutes of silence in the morning, 1 line in a journal, 1 honest conversation per week, 1 evening without screens. These steps do not alarm the brain, and that is why they allow awakening. Stories help us realize we are not alone. Aisha, a music teacher in New York, lived in endless schedules, rehearsals, lessons, concerts. She loved music, but one day she realized she could no longer hear it. Everything was routine. She left for the countryside without a plan, simply to listen. In the first month, anxiety. In the second, boredom. In the third, she cried when the wind played against her windows. Music had never left. It had only grown silent, waiting for her to return. Sometimes we are not tired because we do too much, but because we live too long in a life that is not ours. The brain, the most intricate organ of perception, begins to signal this with fatigue, anxiety, and apathy. It whispers, "I can no longer sustain this performance." Losing meaning is not the end. It is an invitation to meet yourself again. And if this thought resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and share your experience in the comments. Let's explore together how science and philosophy can guide us back to life. When we say we are tired of life, we are rarely tired of life itself. We are tired of its distorted image, of the role we accepted long ago, the obligations that became walls, the noise that drowned out our inner voice. The brain craves order, structure, repetition. That is its strength, but also its trap. It can sustain us on autopilot for years, waking, working, smiling, but without a spark. Until one day there is collapse, the sudden realization we have been living someone else's life. French philosopher Albert Camus wrote, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. To decide whether life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question of philosophy." He spoke not from despair, but from radical honesty. If life loses meaning, how do we regain it? Modern science shows meaning is not abstract, it is biochemical. In research by Stephen Cole and Bradley Epstein, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, people who felt their lives were meaningful showed gene activation that boosted immunity and reduced inflammation. Meanwhile, those who experienced pleasure without meaning showed activation of genes linked to stress. Meaning literally makes us physically stronger. But where can we find it? Psychotherapist Irvin Yalom identified 4 existential givens: death, freedom, isolation, and the absence of obvious meaning. Each can lead to burnout if we flee from it, but each can also be a doorway to awakening if we face it honestly. Take the story of Elisa, an illustrator from Helsinki. It began with sharp back pain. Tests showed nothing wrong physically. Doctors and therapists could not help. Until one asked, "When was the last time you drew just for yourself?" She could not remember. All her art had been for clients, for briefs, for others' ideas. She bought a canvas and painted simply because she had to. Within a week, her pain faded. Her body had not been sick. It had been refusing to live without soul. Body psychotherapy reminds us that psyche and body are one. When meaning is lost, the body speaks with insomnia, pain, or numbness. If we do not listen, the signals grow louder. The body demands, "Return to yourself." Philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote that the human being is the creature capable of being with itself. Yet most of our lives, we flee from this state into routines, screens, work, caring for others, anything to avoid meeting the self that quietly pleads, "Look at me. I am alive. I am not a function. I am human." Burnout arrives when the gap between inner and outer becomes unbridgeable. It does not matter where you are, in an office, on stage, at home, or alone. Without authentic connection to yourself, energy drains away. And if it drains too long, the brain protects you by numbing. It builds walls. It closes the heart, not because you are bad, but because you are burned from not being yourself. One veteran described his struggle after war. "I was not afraid of dying," he said. "I was afraid of living the same as before, because it felt like slow suicide, pretending everything was fine." His healing began with a letter he wrote to himself. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak the truth, not the heroic version, not the proper version, simply the truth. Try this yourself. Write a letter to you, not for anyone else, not for effect. Write your fears, your longings, what you want, but do not allow. No censorship. No one will see it, but your brain will feel heard. Psychological healing begins when we stop living mechanically and start asking questions. Not because there are ready answers, but because questioning itself awakens us. If this exploration moves you, please like this video and join the discussion in the comments. Your voice may inspire someone else to begin their journey. We are taught life is a race, to succeed, to achieve, to prove. But in this race, many lose the essential, the simple awareness that you are alive. Healing begins not in acceleration, but in stillness, in small returns to yourself. An old Zen master once said, "When you are tired, drink tea, watch leaves moving in the wind, seek nothing. Perhaps then you will hear life beating within you once again." And this is the lesson Viktor Frankl left us. He survived the unimaginable, yet taught that meaning is not luxury, but necessity. In his words, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. If he could find light in the darkest camps, perhaps we too can find ours in the fog of modern life. So if this journey through science and philosophy speaks to you, do not forget to subscribe to the channel Grounded in Science. Share this video with a friend who might need it, and let us continue this conversation together. Because burnout is not the end. It may be the beginning of a deeper encounter with ourselves. Sometimes fatigue does not come suddenly, but quietly. It sneaks into our days, disguised as laziness, distraction, or lost interest. You wake up and feel that nothing excites you, nothing calls you, nothing sparks. It is as if someone turned down the volume of the world until it became a whisper. Everything around you remains the same. People, work, obligations, yet you feel transparent, almost absent. Psychologists call this state emotional deafness, and it is one of the key symptoms of burnout. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Under chronic stress, the brain's dopamine system becomes disrupted. Dopamine is not merely the so-called pleasure chemical, as popular culture suggests, but a fundamental neurotransmitter of motivation and anticipation. When this system is thrown off balance, the brain stops distinguishing between what is valuable and what is not. Everything becomes equally gray. We are not lazy. we are deafened. Canadian researchers led by Professor Judith Moskowitz discovered something fascinating. The ability to notice small, pleasant events during the day is directly linked to recovery from emotional exhaustion. Not a vacation, not radical meditation retreats, not even a change of career. But something simple, the sparkle of light in leaves, a kind word overheard, the taste of bread. It is like fine-tuning perception. When the entire world feels dim, you can begin with a single bright stroke. The paradox is this: what exhausts us most is not events themselves, but our inner resistance to them. Living in constant battle with ourselves. I must be better. I cannot disappoint. I have to manage. We spend energy not on life itself, but on sustaining an image. Psychologist Stephen Hayes calls this the tyranny of happiness, when the endless pursuit of positivity becomes the very source of suffering. Sometimes healing begins not when we search for joy, but when we allow sadness. The sadness that comes when you are tired of being strong, of always controlling, of forever playing a role. In that honesty lies the chance to return to yourself. Consider the story of Inna, a photographer from Lviv. She stopped taking pictures. The camera itself provoked anxiety. Each new client brought not excitement, but fear of inadequacy. She decided to pause for a month, then another, then half a year. One day, walking in the mountains, she picked up the camera again. Not for a client, not for approval, but for herself. She took a single photo, a tree in fog. That image later became the centerpiece of her new exhibition, dedicated to silence. Fatigue is not weakness, it is a signal. It does not mean you failed. It means you have walked against yourself for too long, that your inner self demands to be heard. Fatigue from life is not the end. It is an invitation to begin differently. Look at a child. A child does not pretend everything is fine. When they hurt, they cry. When tired, they lie down. They rejoice without cause. We once lived this way. But then we became adults. We learned to wear masks, to smile when we want silence, to work when we want rest, to support others when we can barely breathe ourselves. Burnout is not just tiredness. It is the loss of connection to what nourishes. So what do we do if we feel burnout, emptiness, inner depletion? Rest is not always enough, nor is simply switching jobs. Sometimes what is required is a deeper inventory of life. How am I living? What am I avoiding? What words inside me are waiting to be spoken? Sometimes it is enough to reclaim something small that once inspired you. Dance, writing, music, solitary walks. Remember, what did I love before I became obligated? What did I do simply for itself, with no purpose? What gives me the taste of life? A simple exercise. For 1 week, write down 3 things each day that brought you joy. Let them be small. The smell of coffee, the warmth of water, the hush of morning. Research by Barbara Fredrickson shows that joy is trainable, like a muscle. The brain rewires itself around these micro moments of awareness. The more we notice them, the faster the brain returns to aliveness. Burnout is not a finale. It is a pause, necessary for recalibration. A space between "I cannot go on" and "I now want something different." You do not need to change your whole life immediately. Sometimes it begins with a single step: turning off the phone in the evening, looking out the window, walking without headphones, reading the book long postponed, or simply sitting in silence. And silence is not emptiness. Silence is the space where the new is born. In silence, the brain stops drowning in external stimuli and begins to hear the faint signals within. In Finland, in the early 2000s, a study placed people in daily silence for 15 minutes. Within 2 weeks, participants showed improved cognitive function, lowered cortisol, and heightened sense of meaning. Just from silence, not striving, not pretending, just being. Sit in silence and ask yourself, if I had only one free day, how would I spend it? The answer may surprise you. Often we are so far removed from our own desires that we no longer know where to begin listening. Fatigue from life is not always about a bad life. Sometimes it means we have lived too long on autopilot. And the brain, adaptive as it is, tires from sameness. Sleep scientist Matthew Walker has shown that even minor changes to routine, taking a new road home, eating lunch alone, starting the morning without a phone, activate fresh neural pathways and reduce anxiety. The brain needs novelty not as stimulus, but as breath. Take Lara, a translator from Berlin. Her story began with insomnia. She tried everything: yoga, meditation, medication. Nothing worked. Until one night, in despair, she stepped onto her balcony and wept, loudly, fiercely, with every hidden fear. She wept about the burden of holding herself together, about the fear of weakness, about joy she had not felt in years. Then she slept, and in the morning, she understood. Her body had not wanted sleep. It had wanted truth, and when she allowed herself to break, healing began. Our world demands much of us, but most of all, it demands forgetting ourselves, to be useful, to be efficient, to be strong. Yet a person is not a machine. We are more complex, more delicate, more subtle, and therein lies our strength, not in steel, but in trembling, not in speed, but in honesty, not in achievement, but in the ability to love ourselves, others, life itself. When everything collapses, what remains is what is essential: breath, heartbeat, warmth in the chest. Sometimes to return to yourself, you need only slow down, to stop racing, to allow yourself not to know, not to succeed, not to manage. And then, from this emptiness, like a shoot from soil, something new emerges, fragile, authentic, alive. Philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote that the greatest tragedy of human beings is when they stop reflecting on meaning, yet continue pretending to live. Her solution: honesty. To ask yourself, what do I truly want? And to let that desire exist. A beautiful metaphor helps here. A tree in autumn does not die. It sheds its leaves so that in spring it may begin again. Perhaps we too must sometimes allow ourselves to shed. Roles, obligations, expectations, words that are no longer ours, to remain not empty, but open. Layla, a physician with 20 years of practice, once admitted she lost the taste for life. Her days became a gray river without banks, patience, paperwork, endless night shifts. I was not sad, she said, I just stopped feeling. She had family, recognition, respect, but it all seemed to happen to someone else. She took a 6-month leave and went to a village in Anatolia. There she grew tomatoes. No purpose, no productivity, just earth, sun, and silence. Slowly, something warm returned, a faint shadow of herself, but alive. Months later, she returned to her patients, this time not just as a doctor, but as a human being who remembered why she lived. Meaning is not absent, it is hidden in noise. Like a star invisible in city lights, it hides behind screens, tasks, expectations. Meaning does not thrive in speed. It is quiet. It requires listening. Modern psychology calls this life deprivation, a state where all basic needs are met, yet presence in one's own life is missing. You feel as if you are watching a film in which you are not the protagonist. According to Martin Seligman's research, even successful people may experience this if they lack engagement, the flow state where you feel fully alive in the moment. One gentle path back to life is the practice of slow attention. You consciously focus on one action: washing a cup, noticing water on glass, brushing your teeth, feeling the bristles, sitting by a window, letting your eyes rest. This is not meditation in the strict sense. It is returning to bodily presence. And unlike the mind, the body never lies. If you are in the body, you are no longer lost. Fatigue from life is not weakness. It is a signal. Like fever that signals healing, fatigue is the psyche's way of saying, stop. You turned the wrong way, or you have been silent too long, or you are no longer living your life. The sooner we hear the whisper, the less the psyche must scream. Ancient Buddhist monks practiced a simple morning ritual, asking themselves, what in me is alive right now? Not to judge, not to analyze, but to listen. Maybe it is anxiety, or longing, or emptiness. If you notice it, you are no longer numb. You are connected again. Another helpful question: what is my most honest pain? Not the public pain, not the rehearsed one, the quiet one you ignore. Fatigue often grows from this abandoned pain, from what was silenced for the sake of should. Healing begins when we dare to name it, to a friend, a therapist, or even ourselves. One woman at 40 wept for the first time in therapy. She confessed, "I've been good all my life, convenient, strong. I am simply tired of being strong." That moment was a turning point. Not a miracle, not sudden joy, but honesty. She allowed herself to be alive, and the living are vulnerable, but they can feel. Michel Foucault once wrote that caring for oneself is an act of resistance. In a world that teaches us to produce, to please, to prove, simply sitting and listening to yourself is revolutionary. Not an escape from the world, but a return to the self who once loved the rain, believed in kindness, and dreamed without reason other than it was impossible not to. If right now it feels as if you do not want anything at all, it does not mean something is broken in you. It means you have wanted the wrong things for far too long. The way forward is not about immediately forcing yourself to discover a brand new purpose. It begins with allowing yourself not to know, to simply be, to rest, to sleep, to look at the clouds drifting above you, to read something that has nothing to do with work, to say no without guilt, and only later, after silence and stillness, to feel the quiet pulse of a question rising inside. What if I try living again? You do not need to hunt for meaning in everything. Sometimes life fills with meaning on its own, the moment we stop squeezing it out like juice. Meaning is like breathing. It returns naturally once we stop holding our breath. It returns when we let ourselves awaken slowly, with doubts and hesitations, but also with a fragile hope. So if you feel exhausted right now, do not rush. Do not accuse yourself. Fatigue is not weakness. It is a message. It does not arrive to push you into surrender. It comes so you can finally place your hand on your chest and listen to your own heartbeat. And if you are tired, do not compare your weariness with someone else's strength. Each of us carries our own backpack, walks our own road, and hides our own stones in our shoes. Just because someone is running today does not mean you must run as well. Perhaps you have already walked much farther than they have, only without applause, without an audience. Perhaps your silence itself has been an act of courage. Too often, we inhale other people's lives like smoke. We scroll through feeds, we read about their successes, and somewhere deep down, the question stings. And what about me? Why am I not there? Yet nobody posts their exhaustion. Nobody shares the nights of doubt when you cannot drag yourself from under the blanket. Comparison is a lie, because you are comparing someone else's shop window to your own backstage. And almost always, you will feel less than enough. When life hurts, do not search for someone to blame. Do not attack yourself for not coping. You are not a machine designed to function. You are not an algorithm. You are a living person. You have the right to pause, to fall apart, to be confused. This is not failure. This is the beginning of returning to yourself. You are not weak if you need rest. You are not lazy if today you cannot give 100%. You are not obligated to be productive. Sometimes the bravest act is silence and a cup of tea alone, or the tears that finally spill after weeks of restraint, or a walk with no destination simply because inside you need space.